a lot of people in this day and age get their information from social media, places like Twitter and places like Facebook. Elon Musk has just bought 9% of Twitter stock, becoming its biggest stakeholder. Jack Dorsey, who's the inventor, or one of the inventors of Twitter, owns 2.3%. So now Elon Musk owns 4 times as much stock as Jack Dorsey does of Jack Dorsey's company. I don't know if you can still call it its company, but certainly one of the guys there from day one. And this has been seen around various kind of internet sites as a very good thing. There is a sector of the community, especially in America, who are talking about Twitter being a place that hasn't been a free speech place for a very long time, and they're very happy about it. We'll get into that part of the conversation shortly, but first, I'd like to bring into the show from the New Zealand Tech Podcast to talk about the actual purchase, Paul Spain. Paul, good morning to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
We don't have your mic there, Paul. There is something that hasn't worked. It says you're on this end, but your mic levels don't seem to be working with us. Give it another go. Live streaming.
Okay. How are we doing?
Here we go. Beautiful, sir. Fantastic. Thank you for being with us. Do appreciate your time, Paul. Yeah, so anyway, Elon buys 9% of Twitter. You're someone who is ensconced in the tech world. What's been the reaction? Good, bad, and different?
Look, I think a lot of people are enthused by this. It stirs things up a bit at Twitter. Jack Dorsey seems to be bringing Elon into the fold. Certainly, the share price is up nicely. So
Yeah.
I guess anyone with shares in Twitter at this stage will be hoping that this is a good thing long term for Twitter. And to a degree, Twitter's been this niche place. A lot of people that are involved in the media use it to keep up with what's going on. But of course, it's had a user base that's a lot smaller than the Facebooks and TikToks and even YouTube. So I'm kind of curious how this will play out, because Elon himself has such a big following and is one of those people that is so important probably to Twitter and Twitter's future. And of course, with Trump getting kicked to the curb by Twitter, a controversial character, but Trump probably kept a certain segment of the population engaged with Twitter who may well have disappeared. So there's an aspect of that. However much however we feel about Trump, from the perspective of keeping a platform alive, you do need a range of voices that come from different perspectives for it not to be an echo chamber.
Yeah.
I mean, tell the truth, right? I mean, people need to tell the truth. He was not telling the truth, like blatantly lying and blatantly calling people out that actually didn't deserve it. There's opinion and then there's lies, and that's what he was doing, and that's why he got banned.
Yeah, look, I'm not debating that at all. I'm just saying that I think this is a good, is probably a good step from the perspective of the future of Twitter. Having that influence of Elon, but we will see over time, because it may not end up being good. But the initial viewpoint is, I think is probably reasonably positive. But nobody knows exactly how it's actually going to play out, having Elon involved with Twitter.
Do we know how Jack Dorsey feels about it?
Well, Jack has tweeted, and this is what he said: "I'm really happy Elon is joining the Twitter board. He cares deeply about our world and Twitter's role in it. Parag, who's the CEO now of Twitter, and Elon both lead with their hearts, and they will be an incredible team." So that's
invited onto the board. So he has been invited there, right? Well, that's different, isn't it? Because I was like, is this a hostile takeover? So clearly, it's not.
Well, can I suggest as well that I know that with the shares that Elon bought and the increase in price of those shares, between him buying the shares and the announcement, Elon made himself $1 billion extra, which means if Jack Dorsey has about a quarter his shares, then Elon joining made Jack Dorsey about $250 million. So it's pretty hard to be grumpy with someone who's attached to your product and brings you in $250 million with an announcement. I did want to touch on this a little bit though, Paul. This is from an article that we were looking at before, but it talks about, because I'm interested in the timeline. Because Elon quite recently was talking about Twitter and talking about, what should happen with Twitter. It's unclear just when Musk bought the stake. Securities and Exchanges Commission's filing made public on Monday says, but what they do say is that there was an event triggering the filing that happened on March 14th. So on March 14th, there was, even though they can't give us the exact date he bought them, but on March 14th, something happened that triggered the filing of these shares being bought. Now, 2 weeks after that, on Twitter, Elon Musk was saying things like, given that Twitter serves as a de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. What should be done? Actively asking questions about what happening on March 27th, 2 weeks after the 14th, is a new platform needed. So there's an interesting dynamic here as well, which is, when did he buy his shares? When did he start talking about it? When did he start talking about opposition? He put a poll out asking, do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle of free speech? No was 70% of respondents, and he's got 80 million followers, so it's a pretty big sample size there. So the other thing about free speech is, obviously there is laws around free speech in America that don't apply to the rest of the world. They have a different way of doing things, which means an American company set up in America adhering to American rules may not be necessarily the case in New Zealand or Australia or the UK or France or China or wherever else that this may or may not be. So when they talk about free speech in America, it might be different from what, for example, we would allow free speech to be here in New Zealand as well. So
yeah. It's also worth clarifying that the free speech from the American Constitution, that is not pushed on to Twitter or any private entity. So Twitter can have their own rules, right? And it doesn't have to line up with what the government facilitates or allows. And I guess that's probably what's being asked about here. Is that appropriate and balanced? And look, you can probably have a wide range of opinions on that, depending on where people sit on the political spectrum. And so that response of 2 million people responded and voted on that will be those that are closely aligned with Musk's viewpoint, and probably hence why a lot more people said no than said yes to how things are operating on Twitter currently.
I didn't actually realize, because the way Americans trumpet their free speech thing all of the time, I just assumed that those laws did extrapolate out. Do you think the average American knows that corporations can make their own? It feels like not to me.
Not as much.
Yeah,
they're not as much. I mean, there are things, and I think it's the same with laws anywhere in the world. There are some things you do have to adhere to. Like, you couldn't ban someone from Twitter because of their ethnicity. That would be against the law. But so there are still some laws that every company needs to come under when it comes to discrimination and stuff. The question is, and then also the question that Elon was asking, and lots of people have asked, is that when these social medias become the place for public discourse, should they therefore come under more of a public entity, even though they're private companies? And that's the conversation that I think all social medias are having at the moment. Would that be fair, Paul?
Yeah, look, it's a really hard thing, because as users, we see these platforms as a public service, but of course they're businesses. They're there to make money, and if they put a foot in a direction that the majority of users dislike, then a platform can be cancelled. Overnight. Now, we're yet to see a platform get cancelled probably overnight that I can think of, but what we see is a progression, and Facebook is where we see that, right? Where their numbers haven't been tracking particularly well over a period of years, up to the most recent stats where, when investors realized, hold on, this trend is really, really real, and their share price dropped. Now, I think investors there weren't actually watching what was going on, because it was just a trend that had been going on, for 4 years.
the one thing about all of his statements, though, there is absolutely no mention of, radicalization and hate speech and how things like that led to like the storming of the Capitol, all that sort of stuff. There's absolutely no reference to any culpability around that sort of thing. So doesn't that feel like lacking?
Do you mean the statements by Elon Musk?
Elon Musk is not taking any responsibility for social media's culpability in radicalizing a lot of people.
Well, I guess in fairness, I know I can't speak on behalf of Elon Musk, even though, I've got lunch with him next week, but I can't speak on behalf of him, is that he's been there for 5 minutes. So let's give him a chance to see what he comes out with, to see what he can change.
But that's why the freedom of speech curtailment has happened, is because of that. So you can't talk about that without referencing why.
I don't necessarily agree with that as an absolute. I think there's lots of examples of people being booted off Twitter, for example, without breaching those freedom of speech or without breaching those criteria, yet they have breached Twitter rules and conditions, in terms of conditions, whatever. Because the thing with freedom of speech, and this is maybe moving into a freedom of speech conversation, is you either have complete freedom of speech or you have no freedom of speech. So I think what most countries have is some freedom of speech. The classic example of if you tell a leader of a country you're going to commit, you're going to kill them, your freedoms of speech gets curtailed quite quickly. So you don't have freedom to say everything, but the question that's going to be asked constantly is, where is that line? I mean, you have the right to offend someone, yeah. Do you have the right to use language that's going to bring direct harm to them? No. And then what is that? I mean, we've been told in this day and age that some people are saying, words are violence now. And if that's the case, how does that come to committing a violent act against someone across Twitter? So I actually think this is a bigger conversation to do with what we're doing in society at the moment. And we're in the middle of that conversation. So I think it's going to be a bit muddy. But basically, freedom of speech is kind of the freedom to lie as well as tell the truth. And I'd hear more to that side of the conversation of, I think more speech and more good speech is better than stopping all speech or stopping speech that is wrong or disagreeable at times, if I was to adhere to one camp or another, which is difficult.
And you have hardly ever been the subject of a whole lot of it, really. I mean, I know that you think that you can claim your fatness and all that, which you've said before. I'm not just throwing that out.
Really? I'm shocked.
I'm going to be careful now. I mean, you've used that before. I'm not just.
I've had death threats. I've had things when I was working at ZB. I've had death threats turn up to my house. I've been a sufferer of it. I'm not in any kind of cultural or marginalized group though that has been the sufferer of it. But look, what I'm saying, and we're kind of sidestepping the conversation a little bit about Elon here, which is why Paul's with us, is in general, I don't think there's a black and white answer here, but if I was being forced to give a black and white answer for me, it would be erring on the side of more speech than less speech. That's where I would sit, as opposed to the other side. But anyway, Paul, you are welcome to join in on that, Paul, if you want, although you were more here to talk about the deal with Elon and Twitter.
Look, I think these discussions are really hard, and that you can quickly get into all sorts of debates around, well, what is a lie and what isn't. I saw what was it, an AM show clip the other day from talking with the Prime Minister, and the way that was cut suggested that the Prime Minister was being dishonest. I would imagine if you actually surveyed the population, you'd probably find it would be maybe roughly cut based on sort of political viewpoints, in terms of there might be a third that are like, oh, I don't know, a third that are like, yeah, definitely lying, maybe a third that'll be like, no, it's 100% straight up, right? So these things aren't as simple probably as we would like them to be, and what people feel is right sort of depends on so many different factors, and maybe how close they are to a particular situation and what other extra facts that they know that might surround a situation.
Well, it's a spectrum, isn't it? Because the election was stolen from me is a very easily disproven lie. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and I think, I don't know. And that's what social media has been reacting to, all of this sort of stuff. And yeah, sometimes it swung too far. Like I was telling Pat once, I got banned or I got a warning on Facebook for saying chink in the armor. So, you know, it's like sometimes it just goes too far. So and I didn't even understand what it was. And then my husband was like, maybe because it's a Chinese slur. And I was like, oh my God, didn't even think about it. So yeah. Anyway.
I see Elon still talking about what to do with it, and I think this was a tweet that just came out today, which is quite funny as well. I quite like what he's done with it. Do you want an edit button?
Yes.
YSE or ON? User or on? And I just on this point though, I wonder if he's got writers. If he doesn't have writers, that's quite a good tweet. On this point though, someone has made this point. Liz Wheeler, I don't know who Liz Wheeler is, but she's checked. So she's the host of the Liz Wheeler Show, one of the most anticipated new video podcasts of the year, apparently. And she says, here's my argue against the edit button. What if a tweet goes viral, lots of retweets and millions of impressions, and then the author completely changes the meaning? Not just a grammatical fix, but a total ideological change or a shameless self-promote. Actually, I love the idea because I fat thumbs and I do it often. I have to delete it. But that's actually a really interesting point about after your, I mean, maybe there could be like once it is tweeted more than 5 times, you can't change it. Or I know with Facebook, when you're doing a Facebook ad, if they authorize your ad, you can't then edit the post because they've authorized it. Maybe there'd be a way around that. I don't know. Any thoughts around that, Paul?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a few suggestions on, you know, a time limit, and yeah, there's probably some mechanisms. You know, how long do you allow changes for? Do you allow a complete wholesale change? There's some scenario under which that works, but certainly not if it's been, you know, retweeted out there and got out to a whole lot of people. And I don't think that would be the intent of it. I think these things are more for, you know, a typo or, you know, clarification. So in that what I would say sort of become a bit of a tweet storm around it, because people were leaning more in the direction of yes. I said no or on to play in with his humor there. But look, we cope with it as it is, and I kind of like that Twitter's stood out and just said no. Everyone's been pushing for it. Every other platform allows it, but we're not going to have it here. Let them be unique.
Facebook does that edited feature, so that is a possibility. But as someone who's a bit of a grammar pedant and spelling, you know, it just hurts my soul to have things out there like that. But then maybe that's just because I'm a wanker. So I
think if they did it, you'd have to actually give access to the prior tweet, right?
Yeah.
So you've got it. You'd say edited, but you'd actually also be able to view the original. I think that would be very, very important.
Yeah, you can do that on Facebook. So yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell people if they want to find out about the NZ Tech podcast and stuff, where they go, how they find you, how they hear more of your thoughts and opinions?
NZ Tech podcast, just easy to find through all the usual, you know, podcast apps, and we do tend to stream as well. LinkedIn is probably where more people connect with me than anywhere else. So yeah, we stream there, but we do also stream across onto the YouTubes and Facebooks and Twitters as well. So yep, you can track me down on any of those platforms.
Awesome. Hey, look, thanks, dude, for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving us a few minutes about the big purchase. It's like his new toy. You know, you can tell the age of the boys by the price of their toys. Elon Musk's latest toy. Thanks, dude.
Cheers. Thanks, Penny. Thanks, Pat.